Hello, everyone, and welcome to the community update of February 2023. In this community update, I'll be showing some of the latest features that we added to StepZen, including updates to our Snowflake connector. So, in the previous community update, you might have heard me talking actually about the new Snowflake connector. And in this live stream, I will show you more updates to the connector that we have for Snowflake. What I also have for you in this live stream is more updates to the StepZen dashboard. For example, you can now use the dashboard for public GraphQL APIs. So you can use the StepZen GraphQL dashboard whenever you're using a API built with StepZen, but now it's also possible to use APIs built with other tools, or maybe even public GraphQL APIs that you don't have any control over. What I also will be showing is our very new StepZen request, which is a CLI command that allows you to do requests to GraphQL APIs directly from your terminal. First, let me open up the dashboard and show you our latest updates. So let me open up my dashboard right here. In here, you can now see a GraphQL API that's built to work with Airtable. And as you see, it's linked to my personal account. What I can also do is use the dashboard for APIs that are public. For this, I can just log out and keep using the same Explorer, but this time I will use it without being signed in. And something that's pretty cool, actually, it shows me a GraphQL API that's in there by default. So if you go to the StepZen dashboard without being signed in and you're looking at the Explorer, you can already try out a public GraphQL API that we connected for you. For example, this will, it's probably just a GraphQL API that generates some random strings, as you can see right here. We can also use the same interface with popular free public GraphQL APIs. And therefore, I'd like to share a new blog post created by Sam. If I'm sharing this tab instead, you can see this blog post on the StepZen blog that says, explore 10 free public GraphQL APIs. And here Sam has listed some of the great GraphQL APIs that you can find online that allows you to, for example, see information about countries, work with GitHub, but also a Pokemon API, a Rick and Morty API, which you might know from some of the live streams that we done before, Star Wars, and also some StepZen public APIs that we created using our tool REST-to-GraphQL. Let's have a look at the countries API. And for this, I can just press this button, and it will bring me to the StepZen GraphQL Explorer, where I can now use this public API and see what it looks like in the GraphQL Explorer. I, of course, can also change this API in case I want to try something else. We can also just run with it as I have it right here. From here, you can see the docs will work, so you can introspect the GraphQL API, see what information is available. So we can find countries, we can find a country by its country code. You can also find continents and languages and all sorts of information. You can also see the history of the GraphQL APIs that you run. As you can see here, it shows the type of code query that I run before. There's also the GraphQL builder, which is open by default. And this is a useful way to help you construct your GraphQL queries. For example, it shows all the queries that I have in my schema and lets me just click on them and add them right here. So I can find continents. I can then find the countries per continent. I want to have the country code and also want to have the continent code. If I run this query, I can get, well, for this continent, all the country codes in there. You probably also need names, otherwise it will be a bit harder to figure out what to do. But you can do all this directly from the StepZen dashboard, even without having a StepZen account. Of course, if you sign in, you can start building on top of your own GraphQL APIs built with StepZen. But all the features remain the same, including also this cool Connect code exporter. And this code exporter shows you how to export snippets for JavaScript, for Python, for React Apollo. So if you're building a full stack application with React, React Apollo might be a good choice for you. in terms of an API, GraphQL API client. You can see how to work with use query, use mutation. And this will also work with subscriptions. So if you have a public subscription API, you can also just put it in here. But if we start looking at the code exporter, we can see we have a curl request here, which brings me to the following. Actually, I want to try out the new StepZen GraphQL request. Actually, the StepZen request API command. So let me pull up a terminal in which we can try and play with this new CLI command. For this, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and instead I will start sharing a different screen that has my StepZen request terminal in there. So I want to share a screen, and this time I'm going to be sharing my entire screen. Make this a tad bit bigger. So what we can do with the StepZen request command, we can run a command directly from a workspace where we have a GraphQL API. So for this, let me go to a StepZen examples directory. So this is the StepZen directory that we have on GitHub, where you can find all the examples of working with StepZen GraphQL APIs. For example, we can try out the with REST example. In here, and this is a StepZen GraphQL workspace. If I would look at all the files in there, you can see there is a StepZen directory, which I can just cd into. And here you can see we have some GraphQL files. What I can do from here, I can use a curl request to see what my GraphQL API looks like, explore the queries, and find out how stuff works. I can also just open up my with Nano, open up my REST.GraphQL file. And in here you can see I have a query called getCustomerList. Let's try out this query and find out what it looks like. Copy the name and then just exit this viewer. To try out this GraphQL API, I can of course use external tools such as the StepZen GraphQL dashboard, which we just saw. The Explorer in there is a great way to start exploring your GraphQL API. I can also use tools like Postman, or when you're in StepZen using the CLI, you can also use the localhost graphical. But there is another option, which is using curl. And in the dashboard, we already saw an example of a curl request. And let's try and get the same request in here. For this, of course, I should keep this page open. And what I want to do here, I want to try out a curl request that gives me the information about this specific API that I have in here. And fun fact, you don't need to deploy this API. It will automatically introspect the directory that we have here and then find out what types will be available. So with curl, I could just run a curl command. I need to use the endpoint name. So if I would want to try a curl command, I can actually just deploy this API. It would be easier. So let me just run StepZen start. This will deploy the API, and it would also give me a name of the API. But first, let me update the CLI just to be sure that I have all the latest goodies in there. And to install the StepZen CLI, you will just run npm install, make sure to append the global flag, and then StepZen. And while we're waiting for this to finish, what I will be doing here is I will deploy the API. I will then get a curl request to explore my API, and then I will change that curl request in a request with StepZen request, which is one of the latest additions to the StepZen CLI. So I've just installed the StepZen CLI, clear this buffer. So when I run StepZen start, I will deploy the GraphQL files that we saw before. Let's name this API/with REST. I'll deploy my API to StepZen Cloud, and then it will print a curl command that I can start using to work with this API. Just close this. So what I can do here, I can run this command that takes my GraphQL API endpoint. It takes an API key, It sets the content header to application JSON, and it also appends a query. And we can actually change this query to give me some information about the customer list. Let's print customer list here and name this query get customer list. Once I press enter, it should send a request. I see I make an error here. I actually used the wrong name for the query, which is perfectly fine because, well, I will see the response right there in my terminal. Once I use this new updated query name, you can see a list of mocked customers being returned. What I want to do instead of running this curl command that we see right here, I want to be doing something simpler. And with this, I mean running StepZen query. We can actually delete tons of stuff. So we can start by deleting the headers, because StepZen request will automatically put the right headers in there with your authorization key, which it will take from the environment variables on your local machine. It will also take the name of this deployed endpoint, because we are in the works directory where the API was created from. And for this, we can just run StepZen request. We're appending the query, and for this, we also need to get rid of this object. And we just can put a query in like this. And once I press enter, it should start sending a request to my GraphQL API and return the same data as we saw before. So fingers crossed that I actually put in the correct syntax. So let me have a look. And it seems like I did. So this is a simplified version, because we came from this, where you would have a curl request. You need to append the GraphQL API endpoint. You need to append the correct headers for authorization and also for the content type. And also put in a body which has the query in there. But now what I've done instead is just run the command StepZen request, put the query in there, and that's it. This will give me my response directly in my terminal. So when you're building your GraphQL API, you no longer have to leave the terminal. This way, you can just stay in there, keep building, keep exploring, without having to go to any external tool. Although, as we saw in the beginning of this live stream, the GraphQL StepZen Explorer dashboard is actually a good way to start exploring your GraphQL APIs. So what else? I briefly told you in the beginning that we have created an integration with Snowflake. In the previous live stream, I already showed you what the integration looked like and how you can run it. But now we made an update to the StepZen CLI that lets you import Snowflake directly from your terminal. Clear the buffer here. I run StepZen import. If you run StepZen import, you can import databases, REST APIs, GraphQL APIs, SQL databases, NoSQL databases, and since recently, also Snowflake. So when I run StepZen import Snowflake, I need to answer some questions, such as the credentials you have for the database, for the warehouse, actually, because Snowflake, well, it's a database, but it also isn't a database. It's mostly used as a warehouse. Just by appending this help flag, we can get more information about all the information that you might need to append to this request whenever you're trying to import a warehouse from Snowflake. A couple of things are universal, so you need to add those for every database that you like to import. Because the schema that we generate by running StepZen import Snowflake will also have a custom directive that is called add_dbQuery. And the same add_dbQuery directive is also used for MySQL databases, Postgres databases, basically any type of database that has a schema that is for SQL, such as Postgres or MySQL, but also all the cloud providers of databases that are building on top of these different schemas. And for Snowflake specifically, you need to append your Snowflake account ID, which you can find in the Snowflake dashboard, and also the warehouse that you're trying to import. And if you would go to the StepZen blog, you will find a great blog post by one of our great engineers, Dan, who has written a practical example around using Snowflake with a StepZen GraphQL API. And actually, as we already are in the examples directory, let me clean up my terminal real quick. I can actually show you the example of Snowflake. It should be in here. So we have a directory called with Snowflake. And if you would go here, we can find some GraphQL schemas that were generated based on a Snowflake warehouse. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the file we're looking at should be snowamp.graphql. If I would use nano to open this, I can view the GraphQL schema that was generated for a Snowflake warehouse. And if you read through the comments, you can see a lot of what Snowflake does is based on MySQL. So we have a type query. Let me actually scroll down. So we have a type query to get some employees out a Snowflake warehouse. And if you look here, we're using the @dbquery custom directive. We've set the type to be Snowflake. We defined the table. And we also have some configuration that has the credentials to access your warehouse in Snowflake. And you can now generate the same schema by using the StepZen CLI, as I just showed you, by running the command StepZen import Snowflake. So these were the some of the bigger updates we've done. So we just discussed importing Snowflake using the StepZen CLI. I showed you how to access public endpoints through the StepZen GraphQL, through the StepZen Explorer in the dashboard, which actually the name we're using right now. It's called the StepZen Explorer, which basically is a graphical 2 interface directly inside our dashboard. And then, as what we also discussed, was using StepZen Request directly from your terminal to explore your StepZen GraphQL APIs. And for now, this only works with StepZen GraphQL APIs, but at some point, we're also looking to introduce the same capability for any other GraphQL API. So keep an eye out for updates to our dashboard, as well as updates to our CLI, as we continue to start improving building GraphQL APIs for any data source you might have. And for the next community update, which is in March, we might have a special update, as we'll be live streaming that from the StepZen offices, as we're getting the team together right there. So make sure to tune in, and I hope to see you again a second time. And also make sure to find a link to our Discord, which is right here in the description, to ask any question that you might have in the meantime. And if not, I will hope to see you again in next month.